Well, good evening, folks, friends, attenders, I'm not sure, but welcome to the presentation tonight. This is a presentation put on by the Concord Quarter Working Group on Aging Concerns, which has been around since 2017. We have put on several presentations that deal with the concerns of aging adults. We also meet monthly as a group to talk about the aging concerns in our meetings and also aging concerns that are happening amongst ourselves. So that's kind of the organizational background for this. So tonight's presentation is going to be in three parts. We may not get to part three, depending upon the time, but we have an occupational therapist who is going to be doing a 45-minute presentation on her experiences with senior drivers and how she tries to help them. And then we have what I consider a kind of unique opportunity to hear from three people who have either been in driving retirement through most of their lives or who are going into driving retirement. And Gary Johnson, if he comes on, he'll be introducing those folks. They're from Kendall. And then if we have enough time, we'll go over some URL links that I've collected that offer transportation resources to seniors who need them. So we'll get started with Susie Tuchinski, who's here. I don't know where on your screen she is, but she's over there on my left. And Susie is an occupational therapist and certified driver rehabilitation specialist. She's been doing this for over 20 years, and she began her career at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, I assume, right? And she now owns and runs her own practice called Adaptive Mobility Services. And in her practice, Susie works with licensed drivers to determine fitness to drive. And she's also an active volunteer, published author, adjunct professor, lecturer, and mentor. And I have to say, Gary Johnson and I, who's part of our group, saw her present on driving and dementia for the Penn Memory Center back in November, and it was an excellent presentation, and that's why we wanted Susie to come on. So Susie, take it away. Oh, by the way, I will be fielding questions in the chat. So my name's Rich Ailes. Send the questions to me, and I'll serve them up to Susie when the time comes.
Thank you so much, Rich, and the rest of the group for inviting me to be part of this network and presentation. I'm so grateful to be here. Rich, I just realized in my pursuit out the door, I didn't grab a clock with me. So I'm wondering if I don't have any clock around, which is very unnerving.
Susie, I've been a clerk at a Quaker meeting for several years, so I know how to I know how to put the kibosh on time.
Okay, I just want to make sure if just let me know if I need to wrap it up.
I'll give you that with about 5 minutes to go. Would that be okay?
That would be fantastic. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right. So I think, Chris, you have the presentation for me. I've got a couple slides I've prepared just so we have some visuals to go along with the conversation for today. As Rich said, I am an occupational therapist. I have my specialty certification in driving, and I went on and got certified as well. I always tell people that really means I'm a big driving geek. I just love the topic of driving, and so I'm happy to be presenting on that today. So we'll go to the next slide. And I think that's probably just my credentials that are popping up for you right there. And my contact information, and we'll show this at the end as well if you have questions for me. I'll tell you, one of my favorite things to do is to help, just help drivers, families answer questions. So please don't ever hesitate to give me a call or to shoot me an email. I'm definitely a resource for you. And we'll go to the next slide, please. Just general disclaimers. Anytime we talk about driving, typically there are questions that may come up that are a little more personal. Of course, this information is just for educational purposes tonight, and I always recommend you seek guidance from a medical professional, specifically if you have specific questions. So next slide, please. I'd like to lead into this conversation about driving by giving you a glimpse into how I actually look at driving from an occupational therapy standpoint. So in the world of driving, there's this gentleman called Mishan, and he developed the driver behavior model. This is what guides us as we're looking at somebody's fitness to drive, safety to drive, overall performance. And Mishan broke down driving into 3 different categories or levels. The first level is operational. The second level is tactical, and then the third level is strategic. And even though they're laid out side by side here, they really kind of layer up on top of each other. So operational is the idea of how do you operate the different components of a car? How do you turn on the engine? How do you press the brake? How do you turn the steering wheel? How do you adjust this, the seat, and so on and so forth? Operational skills build upon.
Totally up to you whether you wanted to have it.
Well, as long as he doesn't get attacked.
Oh, I thought that was a question for me. Sorry. We build on our operational skills to then gain our tactical skills. So that's how do we turn the wheel and press the brake to be able to enter a turn? How do we press the brake in just the precise fashion to stop at a stop sign? How do we follow the lane as we're going around the curve? How do we put the operational pieces together to do tactical maneuvers? I think it's interesting, and I like to bring this up because when we learn to drive, we of course learn with operational, and then we learn the tactical components. And a driving test, like if you go to the state Department of Transportation and you take your driving test, they're going to ask you questions looking at your operational and your tactical driving behaviors. They're going to tell you where to turn, which road to go down, what maneuvers they want. And so we look at that as the basic operation of the vehicle. Over the years, though, as we gain experience, we gain our strategic driving behaviors. And this is the highest level or the hardest level of driving. Strategic has to do with understanding and being able to navigate yourself, being able to manage a detour, being able to readily read and respond to different hazards in the driving environment. So from my perspective, I like to start the conversation with this lens, because when we have new drivers, they build up the operational, tactical, and strategic. But as we age or we experience medical changes or injury, it can affect things at different levels. So if there were a head injury, that might affect strategic thinking. If there was a joint injury, that might affect operational or tactical. And depending on where there might be a change and how it affects the behaviors also affects our intervention and what we might do or recommend to help somebody either continue to drive safely or transition. So I kind of wanted to bring this one up as my frame of reference. I do think it's a very wonderful coincidence that the levels of operational, tactical, and strategic, the initials are OTS, which of course is an OT I love. So just that's how I always remember it as well. So with that lens, let me tell you a little bit, next slide, please, about my company. So as I mentioned, I'm an occupational therapist and I specialized in driving. And what I do is I work with clients in the comfort of their home. I come out to their home and I sit down with them to do a comprehensive driving evaluation. So Chris, if we could have the next slide, please. That comprehensive driving evaluation includes 3 different parts. The first part would include the specialist sitting down with the driver to get to know the driver. We measure things like vision, reaction time, movement, sensation, and thinking. Then we use that information to then go in the car, go for a drive with the individual, and see kind of what performance patterns are coming out, how they're doing. And then the third thing we do is we sit down and we talk about what overall is happening, what patterns we're seeing, and what we would recommend. People who go through a driving evaluation, we generally are recommending either fitness to drive, that they're doing a good job, there's a pattern of safety. Sometimes we're recommending that the individual might benefit from some training. A good example of that would be if an individual has had a stroke that's maybe affected their vision and they're regaining or recovering from that, we might do some training to work on their visual scanning skills and helping them to center their car in the lane. Another example of training might be if you've lost the use of an arm or a leg and you need adaptive equipment, that's something that we do as well. And then the third thing we might recommend is either a hold on driving or driving retirement. And if that's the case, we collaborate. Well, in all these cases, we collaborate with the referring doctor as well to make sure that we're understanding the person totally and we're coming to the best and safest recommendation for the individual. I think the other thing that's helpful to know is I am licensed as an occupational therapist in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So I practice driving rehab in both states. And part of my job when I do that is to absolutely understand the state regulatory process and procedures as well for licensing. So a lot of people want to know, what's going to happen to my license? Where do we go from here? How do I get permission to use this special equipment? And we help them through that process as well. So next slide, please. I think it's helpful, so if we think about the big picture of driving, I personally, I love to drive. I love cars. I've always wanted to be a driver. I remember getting my license as soon as I could. I'm one of 4 kids. I was number 3 and I was chomping at the bit. And I remember my older sister kind of dragging her feet with it, but I've always wanted to drive. And I think I'm not alone in that respect. Driving is just one of my favorite things to do. And so I want people to know that my job as a specialist isn't to restrict people. It's to help keep them as safe and as fit as possible behind the wheel so they can continue driving as long as possible. So if we think about it kind of in that respect of, right in the title, rehabilitation, driver rehabilitation, you want to think about driving or changes to driving early if you're experiencing an injury or illness. So, if you've had an injury to your leg and it's not recovered all the way, if you've had a major illness, even I've worked with people after COVID to make sure that they had the right level of focus and endurance to drive. I've worked with people after strokes. I've worked with people who have had conditions such as muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease as well. I think anytime you're experiencing a major medical change and you've done as much recovery and rehab as you can, but you're not 100%, that's a good time to talk to your doctor to see if somebody like a driving specialist could be helpful to make sure that your driving's still safe. I always say, if we kind of think about the different things we do throughout our day, the basic is kind of getting up, getting dressed, getting to the bathroom, but then the harder things would be like getting something ready to eat or, organizing your schedule for the day or your medications or even cooking a big meal. My mom just did a beautiful Easter dinner for us. That took a lot of work. And as much work as that was, driving is still one of the hardest things we do because it requires all of our skills to come together at one time to be able to make a decision or respond quickly. So because of that, if we're experiencing a change in vision, thinking, movement, even focus and attention, that can affect our performance in the car. And that's where somebody like me comes into play to help make sure that you've either recovered as well as you can, or you're maintaining as well as you can, or we're doing exercises to improve anywhere you can to keep you safe and on the road. I think another major area where I've personally found my career kind of going is working with individuals who have had changes or diagnoses in mild cognitive impairment and in different types of dementia. And so I know that's a really big one, and that's actually something I think about a lot, not just in my career, but my personal life. My family's been really affected by different forms of dementia. And so I think about these individuals and my own self and my own journey and where that might be going. And 20 years ago, what we used to do when I got into this field was we would wait until somebody was really advanced in their dementia, maybe in a mild or a moderate or severe stage. And at that point, we really knew what the answer was, but we would at that time tell them they had to stop driving. And it felt like it was coming out of the blue, right? It's very hard for people who are in this advanced stage of dementia to even understand basic decisions and basic information at times. So understanding something as complex of removing responsibility or removing a task that they felt they've always been able to do is a very hard conversation without that insider judgment. And so when it comes to timing for evaluations with individuals with cognitive impairments, we've now shifted the conversation from later in the condition to as early as possible. And I think that that can be really, really good for many different reasons. And what I've started noticing is, particularly with my work with Penn Memory, is I've become part of their diagnosis process. And I'm able to understand and gather information on someone's baseline skills for driving. And they're able to continue to drive safely until maybe a year, year and a half, or 2 years later. And then we can help them transition to driving retirement as needed. So when we think about timing for working with somebody like me, sometimes it's in the beginning of a condition, such as something with cognition. Sometimes it's after the recovery phase, like stroke or an amputation. But if there's ever a change in vision, motor, cognition, or sensation, it might signal the need for seeing a driving specialist. We can have the next slide, please, Chris. I wanted to show you, because I mentioned this. This is a picture. It looks maybe zoomed in so you could see it. Hopefully it makes sense. But what this is a picture of is actually a hand control. And it kind of looks probably like a gear shift. And that's exactly what it was designed to do. But I wanted to just give you one picture of some of the equipment that I use with my clients. So this is a hand control that actually goes into the vehicle. It can be installed, and the individual is able to push to brake and then pull back to go. A very simple mechanism. Anyone who's driven a manual transmission tends to pick this up very quickly. But this is just one example of equipment that I'll use with people. So this individual, actually today I worked with somebody with peripheral neuropathy related to diabetes. And he was driving to Cape May and realized he couldn't get to the brake pedal soon enough. He said, no one was injured and there wasn't an accident, but it scared him enough that he realized he had to do something. And so we waited a little bit, not driving, and then found somebody like me to help him out. And we're going to get him some equipment so he can go back to driving using his hands instead of his feet, because his hands are in great shape. Other options I have are something called a left foot accelerator. That works really well for somebody who's had an injury to the right foot or the right leg. And then there's a variety of different steering devices I can put in the car as well. When I work with somebody who needs adaptive equipment, part of my job is also to help them through the licensing process, which in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, you need to obtain permission to use that adaptive equipment, but we help people right through that process. We're with them the entire way, including once they get the equipment installed, we do a final checkout with them to make sure they're happy as well. So let's just, it's kind of enough about me and my process. Let's talk about a few more warning signs or things that you might watch for in yourself, in a spouse, and a friend or others that could signal the need for considering or talking to your doctor even about driving. And I would say talking to your doctor is a great place to start. And even talking to, if you have a local occupational therapist, is a great place to start as well. But obviously, I think that it's close to 90% of driving has to do with what you see and how you see it. So the eyes are super important. So if you're experiencing a change in vision, that's a really good reason to consider or think about if it's affecting your driving. Now, there can be really simple solutions, right? Cataract surgery can be a really simple solution if that's something you qualify for. Even for me, I'm turning 46 next week, and I noticed my eyes shifting again. Okay, well then I can get my eyeglasses prescription improved upon to help me with my driving. But if there's some kind of permanent change in your vision, that's something to really think about. Could it affect driving? Changes in sensation into the right foot are also something really to think about. Our brains are really amazing and fascinating to me. And they do a really good job of compensating when we're having changes. We tolerate pain, but we also tolerate sensation loss. So if you are somebody who has diabetes or peripheral neuropathy, you want to make sure you have good sensation into that right foot. Losing that sensation could change understanding where your foot is on the pedal. It's interesting, but we've heard about different people getting confused and hitting the wrong pedal. And we often equate that maybe with cognition. But in many cases, when we study what's going on there, it's that the individual couldn't feel where their foot was. And they thought that they were hitting the brake pedal and they were actually hitting the gas. So right foot sensation is super important. We've hit on this a little bit already, but changes in thinking and focus. And for me, driving really uses that strategic thinking gets at executive function. So problem solving, judgment and insight, changes in those areas could be of concern. There's a lot of research out there that says changes in your IADLs, so instrumental activities of daily living. And for those, we think about, okay, so I always joke because I ask the drivers I work with, are you managing your medications? If you're hungry, can you get yourself something to eat? So on and so forth. And I'll ask about bills. And I like to joke, I can't wait for somebody to pay my bills for me. But I'm talking about changes because it's difficult for you to do them, not because you've given the task away. Anyone want to do my taxes for me? I know we've got that coming up. But changes, I'm talking about changes because you can't manage them or there's difficulty doing them. Falls, the AAA Foundation did a wonderful study about 5 years ago that showed more than one fall in a 6-month period puts you at a higher crash risk in the car. I believe that was 60 or 65% increased crash risk, which is really interesting because many people don't connect falling with driving or driving risk, but that's something we need to think about as well. We all know that you've got to stay fit, active, and moving. So low levels of physical activity could be a warning sign and concern with driving. And poor sleep hygiene. I have to tell you, I've worked with a handful of patients who had actually had undiagnosed sleep apnea until we started looking at what was going on. And I asked about sleep. And it's just one area that's super duper important. I think back to 10 years ago when my daughter was born, and I know how poorly I functioned without a good night's sleep. I can't even imagine going, months and months and years like that. But sleep is super important, sleep hygiene. Chris, if we could go one more slide, please. So this sentence says concerns should be taken seriously, but what that really, it was concerns of family and friends should be taken seriously. There was a really interesting study that came out. It was part of the Geriatric Summit and Consensus Statements. I know I've got the reference on my computer. I didn't pull it with me today, but they, in addition to changes in 2 instrumental activities of daily living, they found that one of the most important things is to pay attention to what friends and family are saying. So if friends and family are starting to say they're concerned about you or they're concerned about X, Y, and Z, or you're noticing concerns, those are valid and things that should be shared in a loving and supportive way. Other signs that could be concerns would be anxiety with driving. So I have some people tell me that they're just having a hard time. They feel like they get overwhelmed easily, that the traffic feels like it's too much. That's a sign that maybe your processing could be changing or something could be changing, and we should take a look at whether or not you've got the skills to manage that, or we could do something to help you manage it and keep you safer. Getting lost while driving is a major concern. Now, I'm not talking about getting lost because you're going somewhere new and the GPS kaputzed on you or the map, the trip ticks aren't adding up. I mean, getting lost going to someplace familiar that you should know how to get to. That is of concern. And then, that's not an automatic red flag, but for me, I think about, okay, so how did you handle that? And what happens, in that situation? And what happened? Were you able to stay safe? having confusion. I've had, unfortunately, some drivers who have just gotten somewhere and been very confused or not sure where they are. That's, of course, a flag. Stopping in traffic, and that would be stopping in the flow of traffic to try and figure out what to do, where to turn, where to go. And then recent fender benders is also something we kind of encourage people to watch for as well. Chris, if we can do the next one. Oh, that was perfect. You knew it. Back along the topic of dementia and driving, I started to talk about how I think early intervention is really critical and helpful for these conditions with mild cognitive impairment and dementia. But our industry, I read a lot of research with driving and dementia because it's just a big area of practice for me. But it's interesting to me, 20 years ago, even 18 years ago, we didn't have research that supported that individuals with dementia should stop driving. It's only really in the past 15, 18 years that we actually have evidence that supports that. But we do know that now. If you have that diagnosis, so if it's been confirmed, if there's been testing done, we do need to help prepare you for driving retirement. I think that actually knowing that is powerful and important because it can help us to have the conversation about what to do, right? And it helps to give that individual some autonomy when everything else is changing. I mentioned I like to work with people earlier in their condition, and part of that work we do is conversations about how to prepare and when will they know that it's time to transition. And I actually have many clients who, when they're sent or recommended for their reassessment, some of them go through with it and others say, you know what, I'm ready to transition now because I know this is part of what's going on with my disease, which is huge. That's a much bigger thing. It's a much better step that we're seeing versus how it would go if we waited further on the disease. Let's see. Chris, we can switch slides, please, because I think we've covered all those on there. And this I think is really important as well. So in my world with what I do as an occupational therapist, we really believe that engaging in the occupation is the best way to understand somebody's performance. So that for this situation would be engaging in the task of driving. Okay. None of the tests that we perform in the office are 100% accurate. They give me information and insight into somebody. They help me understand what to anticipate, but it's the in-car performance that's really important for me to see and understand. So if you have somebody or you're in a situation where you're talking about driving, I think it's very helpful to consider if an on-road assessment with a specialist could be helpful for really determining fitness to drive, because that's really where essentially the rubber meets the road, right? If we want to know, if somebody is safe to do something, let's let them perform the task so we can really see it. Along those lines, I think I'm seeing more and more driving simulators in different rehab clinics. I love a good driving rehab simulator. They're great for assessment and they're great for intervention. So they're great for looking at problem areas and helping to work on those problem areas, but they don't replace the in-car piece. And in fact, the research out there supports that we should not be using a driving simulator to make a decision about driving fitness. It's really the in-car on-road assessment that helps us. Now, abnormalities in cognitive testing may indicate a driver at risk who could use further assessment, but the assessment piece in the car is really vital and helpful for those individuals. Also, the research has come out, we used to kind of wonder, well, how long between reassessment, if someone has a diagnosis of dementia, how long do we go? And the research does tell us that every 6 to 12 months, we would want to reassess just because of the way that disease does progress. Okay, so as a final note for me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or whatever the rhythm is, Rich. I really focus on safety and independence. as an occupational therapist, I want everyone to do what they can do, and I want people to be as safe and as independent as possible. And it's really important to me that I share this message with a wide group of individuals, because, again, when I came into this field, the conversation was a lot of about restriction. And I really feel like while some individuals, it is time to help support retirement, that the conversation really should be more about empowering and safety and helping people be as autonomous and independent as possible. So if I can be a resource for you, if I can help you find a resource in your area, please don't hesitate, because I think more and more of us come at it from this point of view, especially when we have a background in occupational therapy. So, and I think that brings me back to my slide about me, right? There we go. So do we have any burning questions you want me to answer now, Rich?
Susie, yes, one specific question came up. Losing vision in one eye affects one's depth perception. Can one still drive safely with vision in only one eye?
So in the state of Pennsylvania, they do allow for that. However, I do recommend that conversation with your eye care professional, your doctor, to see if driving rehab still might be helpful, because as this person highlighted, it can really affect depth perception. So if somebody has lost the eye from, unfortunately, a traumatic reason, or the vision for a traumatic reason, then likely cognition and insight and other strategies are still intact. What we'd want to do is really understand, are they comfortable compensating? Can they still pull into a parking spot okay, manage their distance, and so on and so forth. And then depending on the type of injury, it still might be something that Pennsylvania we need to report to them. But it is possible to drive with one eye, and it is possible to drive as long as you have 120-80 degrees of visual field. Sometimes they do recommend those little blind spot mirrors. They call them dual mirrors. Sometimes that's a restriction they recommend, though, as well.
Okay, Susie, I had a question along the psychological vein. So I have a problem getting tested. I tend to get anxious, oh my God, I'm going to get something wrong. How do you deal with a person in this situation where you're actually having to go through all those tests, and even sitting in the car with them and trying to make them feel that this is a good experience? Up, 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 up. Let's see.
There we go.
There we go. Good. Okay, great.
I apologize. I was trying to go back to everyone's screen. This is the challenge. And thank you for bearing with me doing this on my phone. I had to switch locations because of power outages, guys. So I apologize. I think so. My approach to assessment is to build a rapport. I truly believe that when I have the opportunity to sit down with you and talk with you and reassure you, that I will see your best performance. And so when we sit down, the first thing we do is we kind of get the paperwork out of the way, and I look at your license, and then I hand it back to you, and you get to hold that, right? Because that's yours. And then I'm just going to learn about you. And I learned in my career, I actually started as an occupational therapist in psych. And so I was always taught, if I start to feel anxious, it's probably because I'm feeling that off the other person as well. And so I listen to that. And sometimes I've just said, let's take a deep breath. I want you to do this. I like to remind people, I don't work for PennDOT. I understand PennDOT, kind of, the best I can, but I don't work for them. These are the potential outcomes. And then I feel like it's very important for me to be as objective and transparent as possible, so you don't feel like you're being tricked, right? And that you're given every chance. So there's sometimes that I sit down with people and we do an activity, and I'm like, okay, that was the practice. Let's try this again now that you understand what's going on. And, I know if it's improving, I still haven't seen their best yet, and we try it again. So I just think that those feelings are really normal and really good. It's okay to voice it. It's important to voice it as well. Because I do work with some people who are very stoic, and I wouldn't know that they were very anxious. But the other thing I'll tell you is I actually prefer the person who comes to the evaluation with a little anxiety, because that means driving's important. It's the individual who's a little bit cavalier, or who's maybe making some jokes or not taking it seriously. And that could be actually a symptom of their medical condition, right? So it's that person. I think the anxiety actually brings meaning, and those people tend to do a little better. And I just remind them that that little bit of stress actually will help you focus. So let's just keep working.
Great. Now, how about a an evaluation early in one's senior years when we're capable? Is that helpful so that you have a baseline to go from?
Well, we can ask my parents because they've both gone through it a couple different times. I would say that actually I have worked with some individuals who wanted to just have a checkup and a baseline evaluation for themselves. The hardest thing about what I do is it is out of pocket and not covered by insurance. So
Mhm.
many people opt to wait until there is a concern or a question, which is okay too. So I think that there is, you certainly could go through it sooner rather than later, but many will hold off until that there's a question just because of the expense.
Okay, good. I do have some other questions coming in. I cannot imagine not being able to drive. Can you discuss the coping mechanism for retirement, which I think a lot of us share? Will self-driving cars be a magic bullet? Hmm.
Oh my gosh.
So there's
Okay.
two questions there. So take part one.
So, first, I firmly believe that the conversation of driving retirement, just like retiring from work, it is not a one-time conversation. It should not be a decision made by one person, and we do not make this based on one test. Now, with that being said, I might have gathered the information, but if I'm recommending driving retirement, we're still engaging the doctor, we're engaging the family, and so on and so forth. As far as coping goes, it can be very difficult, right? This is an important piece of life. And so with I'm working with somebody who I recommend driving retirement with, I'm not just saying this is what I see and bye, good luck. We're going to talk about strategies. I actually go back to the conversation we started with where I found out, where do they go? How do they get there? Have they ever had to get around without driving? How do they do it? To try and like pull that thread and help them start figuring out how they're going to cope with this and how the family is going to support. The other thing I'll tell you is I always recommend that at least one other family member be present at the evaluation. Now, they can't come in the car with us, but they can be there for the initial interview and they can be there for the outcome discussion. And my rationale is 2 sets of ears is always better than one. And let's have more people involved in this. So I will pull on those family members, because we need to come together as a community. And I've got different strategies. I don't know if you really want me to go into all that now, Rich, but I do provide support as much as I can too.
Sure. We're later on in this program, we'll provide
think
some
so.
URLs where there
I
are
will say,
strategies for transportation, but yeah.
okay, I will say with regards to the silver bullet, full disclosure, I actually have a Tesla myself because I'm so interested in this technology and where we're going. And where I live out in Schuylkill County, and we're having power outages. And I can tell you the technology is pretty cool, but it doesn't always work. So I don't see it as a silver bullet at all. And as an occupational therapist, I actually believe that the technology is great, but we can't rely on it, and it should never replace somebody's ability to manage that vehicle. I've been in that car when everything shuts off on the highway and I'm still driving and I got to drive, right? you know, and the other thing people think, oh, maybe I'll just be able to pop somebody in the car and shoot them over somewhere. But if I'm not going to do that with my child, I'm not going to do that with my parent either. Right? We have to think about cognitive abilities and what's safety levels too. So I don't see it as a silver bullet. And I saw a couple heads in agreement.
Great. Now, somebody asked about leaving up the slide with your contact info, but we'll actually put that slide up on our website so that people can get in contact with you. And probably if the person registered, we'll be sending out that information along with some URLs on transportation resources. after
Perfect.
the break.
I would put it in the chat, but I apologize. I have no idea how to do that on my phone.
No, that's okay. That's fine. We can get out that information to everybody. I know Richard Logan had his hands up. Richard, did you want to ask a question? I don't know. Let's see. He might have asked that question about not imagining being able not to drive, but
I don't think he's in the meeting anymore, Rich.
okay. All right. Thank you, Mike. That's great. All right. Any other questions? If people just want to actually unmute yourselves and ask a question? Well, okay. Susie, it's been a great conversation. Thank you very much, or a great presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes,
I'll hang tight. I'll put myself on mute and I'll be right here.
sure, that'd be great. And if you have any comments while we move along, feel free to do so. That's fantastic. So is Gary with us? Gary Johnson?
I am here.
You're there. Gary, you are introducing our three people from,
Yeah, I only see two of them on here. I just looked at the list of participants. I don't.
you don't see
Conrad,
Conrad?
Conrad, are you on there?
I know Margarita and Nell are here.
Yeah, Margarita and Nell are two of my friends here at Kendall. Both have a very interesting experience of not having driven in their life.
Oh,
Margarita lived, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong here, I believe lived in Staten Island her whole life as a school teacher and didn't just use public transportation up there. Nell lived, I think if I remember right, in Switzerland for a while, but her most interesting part of her story is living in an island off of the coast of Ireland. And there were no cars on the island.
oh, yes, there were, Gary.
Oh, okay, there was some island cars. But most of your transportation was walking to the dock to get on board ship to go to the mainland, to go to doctors or grocers or whatever else. And so these two people have both had experience not having cars. There's a third person who I think did not make it, who drove for a long time and has just given up driving in the last couple of years, and would have other comments to add. But the Margarita and Nell, if you could just talk for 5 minutes each about what's your experience been like not being a non-driver in cultures that are very much driven by people driving.
Nell, you want to go first?
Well, we started out we were out of the country for 50 years before we came to Kendall. We started in Switzerland and we had a car and we certainly used it, but I went to work by train because it meant I could prepare lectures, I could grade papers, or I could chill out and read the newspaper. And it was lovely. I loved the idea too that our children grew up learning how to negotiate buses and trains, and we weren't on call to them nor they to us. And I think it created a huge sense of independence so that each one of us knew where we could go and how. When the kids were all out of the house in 1992, we moved to this little Irish island, 8 miles off the south coast. There was no bridge, so the only way to get there was ferry boat. And by the time we got there, the island was filled with cars known as bangers, um, which meant if you happened to have a slight problem, most of the roads were one way, I mean, just one car width. So there was no speed there. But if you happened to take somebody's bumper or their fender off, you'd stop and say, "Oh, could I help you tie that back on, please?" And they'd say, "Oh, grand, no, just throw it in the boot. Husband will help me later." If we had to go down to the pier to pick up groceries, we would drive. If we were going down just to see people, we walked down. So a lot of us actually had two cars. We had the $100 banger, and then we had the mainland car, which actually had insurance and a license plate on it, but we didn't use it very often. A car was not a part of everyday life. It just wasn't something you needed to get from A to B on a very regular basis. We came back here in 2017 specifically to come to Kendall because my Chuck was beginning to develop cognitive issues. And we knew that this was a fine place for us to be. And the decision was we weren't going to get a car when we got here because with no car, and he was a fabulous driver and he loved to drive, but no car meant that there was just no hassle about going out to drive when it wasn't something that was safe for him or for anyone else. So that made it very easy, frankly, to make the decision. We've used Kendall Transportation since we've been here, do my basic shopping, go to all of our doctor's appointments with Kendall Transportation. We go to the Philadelphia Chamber of Music on an evening. We go to the People's Light Theater using their transportation. And occasionally when we've had visitors who were from Switzerland and didn't happen to have a car because they didn't need one over there, we've been able to get a ride to Winterthur or Longwood Garden if there was an available bus. And it's just been a nice way to travel around. It's obviously saving us a lot of money, which is a wonderful thing, but that's a small part of it in many ways. I think one of the things that some people might find difficult is the patience waiting for a bus to come, or for Kendall Transportation to come pick you up, because it's not a private driver and it's not intended to be. But given that we used to ride the ferry boat, which didn't always arrive on time either, we always have a book in the pocket. And you'd be surprised how many people you meet when you're waiting for somebody to come and pick you up. So it really is a way to meet people and to do things that you might not stop to do if you're part of the car is the only way you're going to get around. And that just hasn't been our case. And that's made it a lot easier, I know. Every now and again when we were flying, which we've given up now, basically, we would get Kendall Transportation for a tenner to go to the airport. They don't pick you up to bring you back, understandably, because you never know when the darn plane's going to land. But they will pick you up from a train station because the trains tend to be more reliable. So I just find that there are all sorts of things that say you don't need a car, but we're also fortunate in that our whole last 50 years of being is 3,000 miles away. And we wouldn't be going to church down the way or going down to have dinner with friends from 25 years ago because they're not here. And I recognize that has probably made it a lot easier for us to pick up on the that side of it. And I don't know whether well, go right ahead, Margarita, tell your story.
Well, thank you. I was really, really happy to hear you, Susie, say empowerment in the sense of making decisions about driving, and you, Nell, to say independence. I grew up in the South Bronx, and then I lived most of my adult life in Staten Island, part of New York City, where the outer borough, they would call it, because it's on the margins of the city. And in between that, I lived in rural towns, and there was always public transportation. If you looked for it, it was there, even if there wasn't a great deal of it. To me, growing up in the city, it was mostly about independence. It was the day I got my free school bus pass, was the last day that my parents saw me with regularity for dinner. It was really tremendous fun. I cannot tell you. I was a very good student, so sometimes I would play hooky in my Catholic school uniform and just ride the buses to wherever. And there were so many buses, and they had interesting destinations written on the top. That it was just, or we would look out the window. Well, we were always looking out the window trying to decide, should we get off? Is this a good neighborhood to get off? I mean, I saw Harlem for the first time on a bus. And sometimes we would plan trips by looking at the train map. And I just wrote down some of the places that we got off and why. What could have made us imagine these places as good places to get off the train. One of them was Hunters Point. What did we expect to find? Two city kids in the Bronx. Great Kills in Staten Island. Kills really means waterway, but a Dutch word, but waterway. And sometimes, so they were disappointing. They really weren't really that exciting. But sometimes we get off at stops that were like Cathedral Parkway, right? St. John the Divine, that's still being built after so many years. Botanical Garden, South Ferry, Broad Channel. Broad Channel had a train track running right over the water. If you stood outside between the carts, you could see the water lapping up to the tracks. It was such great sense of adventure for us. So I have a very positive attitude towards public transportation. I was really dismayed when I heard the expression giving up driving. It really sounded like you were giving up candy for Lent. And it did not match my experience, not only my personal experience, but what my friends tell me who are driving. And they are really, nobody likes to drive except for 3 people. I think around in your 40s, you lose the love of driving. You know, the romance is over. Cars are an old thing to you. So I don't see it as being bleak or doom and gloom. And I think of taking public transportation now while you're healthy and thinking of it the way younger people think of it, as adventure, as being something that is environmentally sound, you're helping out. And when I moved to Kendall, I was told there is no public transportation in Chester County. And I was just like, huh? But the person who told me was a driver. She knew nothing about public transportation. And if I had listened to her, you know, maybe I wouldn't have come to Kendall, because I would have to just have I would have to be dependent on a driver, a Kendall driver. But there is lots of public transportation. And if you are of a certain age, a tender age like ours, it's free. You know, you apply for a senior pass. So I've been taking a transportation class at Kendall Crosslands, and I found out about local transportation. It's a little bit hard. You have to, in terms that you have to do the research. You know, your fingers have to do the walking on your keyboard. You have to put in PennDOT, public transportation in Pennsylvania, look up your county, and you will find more and more and more resources. It really takes a creative person, and I really encourage you, you know, with another healthy friend, to go out there and do it. And I'm looking for one. So that's
Thank you, Irene.
Yeah.
That's great. Let me add, and I think Conrad Paulus has jumped on now, so she can come on in a bit. But just let you know about my brother who lived at Kendall. He's since died. But as he became older and had significant, more and more cognitive impairment, my experience with him is that his technical skills with driving were just fine. I mean, he could get into a car and start it up and move around, put the seatbelt on, and take care of himself. What began to worry me is what would happen if the normal places you were going suddenly had the road shut because of repairs, or suddenly had a detour, or there was an accident that made him decide he couldn't take his normal route to get from here to the Giant or from here to CVS. And he and I had conversations over the better part of a year before he agreed finally that he would like to give up his license and just get an ID card from the state of Pennsylvania. The other thing that helped with him is I was living in Wilmington at the time, and I said, well, I'm just going to commit to coming out there 2 days a week. And if you have anything you want to go get, put it on a list or let me know, or we'll just go over the grocery store and see what seems appealing to you. But the other thing he found is that there were a lot of people here who were willing to help him drive him somewhere on his own. He had friends that he had developed here, and he could ask them for a ride, and it really worked very, very comfortably for him. And the bottom line is he didn't drive his last three years or so of his life. I don't think he really missed it very much.
So as the timekeeper here, we're at 8 o'clock now. I would like to finish by 8:30, but I did want to respond to what Margarita said. I mean, I come from the opposite point of view. I love public transportation. We have our senior card. I love to go anywhere in Philadelphia by train. It's just marvelous. But we just spent 28 days on the road touring the South in our vehicle, and that was a wonderful trip. And both of us, my wife and I, both like to drive. So I know when it comes time for me to go into driving retirement, and I appreciate Margarita's point about not saying giving up. That's kind of an interesting point. I think it's going to be a little difficult. So I think we want to keep that in mind too. There's got to be some kind of coping mechanisms that we kind of develop within ourselves to deal with that situation. I don't know. Is Conrad here, Gary? Conrad,
Conrad is here. I saw her name pop up. I don't know.
I'm here.
Hello.
Okay, Conrad, I know you had a little bit different experience in that you drove for a long time and you gave up driving a couple of years ago. And you might just talk a little bit about how that was for you and how you've adapted to that.
Well, I was always a good driver. I liked driving. I never had any problem with driving. I never had an accident. I had a good insurance company. And so when I did give up driving, which my son really wanted me to do, the only good part of it for me was that I had given my car to my granddaughter, and so she had a car. And I thought, oh, okay, that's good. And I didn't have to pay the insurance, whatever it was, deal with it. And that was all right too. But not until I began to use the Kendall transport, which I really had sort of, oh, well, I guess I have to, did I find out how good they are. And to my surprise, I don't know this area very well. I came from around, not from around here. I came knowing no one here but one person. And then when I got on the train once to come back from New Jersey, I thought there were 2 stops after Philadelphia. Consequently, I rode right past Wilmington. And then I realized, and I spoke to the conductor, I said, I missed my stop. And he said, that's all right. Do you know that the Kendall Transport, we called them, and they came back for me about an hour and a half later. No problem. They were not upset about it. They couldn't have been nicer. And the transport that takes us nowadays to shopping, either north on Route 1 or south on Route 1, as far as Kendall, as far as Wilmington, to all the places you need to go, that's wonderful too. If you don't like doing it, you take a book and read until you get there, and it's really very, very nice. I got a lot of help from Nell Kruger when I first began. I asked her what were some things to avoid and what would to do, and she was very helpful, having done it a long time. Anyway, I can't tell you how you mustn't worry about it. I think we're not really speaking to the unconverted yet, because unless this is going to be put on with a broader audience, but it's really okay not to drive anymore. And
Thank you, Conrad. That's really helpful to hear you say that. And you know, realize this is not a huge loss. There are ways to live your life very richly without driving.
Rich,
Now-
I think you should probably plan with your wife to take some fantastic exotic train tour.
Yes, I've heard.
Places you'd
I've
love to
heard
go.
that. Yes, that
Mhm,
sounds like a
mhm.
lovely thing to do too.
Yep.
Sounds, well, why don't I, since this is a good segue into some of my research, and hopefully I can share my screen, because I'm going to follow on to what Margarita said. I did some internet searching in the past couple of days, and have come up with lots of different resources that are out there. Now, I guess about 10 years ago, I was helping my father, who was quite a cantankerous individual, get to his gym appointments. And boy, was that a difficult thing, because I'd have to call up community transit down in New Jersey, and you had to actually call between 9 and 12. And of course, what would happen is the line would be busy and you had to keep calling back and back and back. And finally you'd get somebody and you could arrange for transportation to pick him up. And that was fine, but I think it's gotten a lot better in the last 10 years. And if you'll bear with me, let's see if I can share my screen here. And boom, boom, boom. Okay, now everybody can see that, I think, right? So this is
That's
a
good.
list of, can you all see that?
Looks good.
Okay, good. So this is a list of transportation resources that are available in the tri-state area. And I've found some interesting ones. I mean, one of the first ones you want to go to, and this follows on with what Susie was talking about, is the options that are available for senior transportation. I mean, that goes through a comprehensive list, and some of them are obvious, like relying on friends or relying on the transportation of any particular residence that you might be at. But one of the things I found interesting was that in Pennsylvania, there is a central site that you can go to. And can people see my browser there? Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, now this central site is called Find My Ride, Apply. And I already tried this. And what they'll do is, actually, I filled out a questionnaire.
Hi, Michelle.
And what this website will do will actually determine what kind of eligibility you have for various forms of, subsidized rides that are in Pennsylvania. And it's actually very nice, because there are options for me not having any disabilities, that, I could use something called Share a Ride, which is something that I found out seems to be in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, where you can actually sign up for a service. They'll come and there'll be several other people riding with you. And you'll have to, they'll take you to your location that you want to go to, but you also have to go to the other locations of the people who are riding that particular vehicle. And it's very low cost. I mean, I don't know, I guess it might be subsidized by the state, but, you know, normally it might cost $30, but this ride sharing option, which is available through this service here, you know, you can get for like $3, depending upon, but you have to put up with riding with other people. Of course, you may be riding with interesting people, so that could be good. Let me see. In Chester County, I mean, just like Margarita said, there is a lot of stuff that's available if you just let your fingers do the walking. They have a service called, let's see if I can get to it. Boom. Boop, boop, boop. Community Transit, Chesco Connect, which again, I think provides individualized services or ride sharing. So, and these kinds of services exist in, you know, Delaware County, they exist in Delaware, they exist in New Jersey. So on this list of URLs, which we'll send out to everybody's here, and we'll also post it on our website, you'll be able to find different resources. Some are private pay, some are subsidized by the state. One interesting new resource, I think it's only been within the past couple of years, is something called GoGo Parent. And this is a service that acts as an intermediary between Lyft and Uber. And you can sign up for this service. It's rather costly, but it actually makes it easier for seniors who might feel uncomfortable doing the Uber app or the Lyft app. And I know, you know, there are a lot of folks that actually use that service, but this kind of makes it easier to use.
Rich,
Yes, go
if I
ahead.
may also say with GoGo Grandparent, that's
Yes,
something where like I could arrange a ride for a family member
yes,
for
yes,
them.
right, right.
So if I wanted to have a car pick my sister up, I can arrange that if I'm comfortable and then take care of it. And I can also track her and where she is.
Right, right, which is a nice service. They also, I believe they also vet the drivers.
Yes.
And, you know, they have a list of drivers that I think that can work with seniors pretty well and their concerns.
But explain the monthly fee if you could.
Yeah, the monthly fee, I was looking at it today. It is a little steep. I mean, the basic fee is about $10. There's another, it's tiered support. $20 gets you a certain, you know, a certain level of service. You'd have to actually go to their website, which is grandparent.com, and see if that's right for you. But there is like a, you know, there's a 27 cents per minute charge that if you actually enlisted a ride with an Uber or a Lyft driver, this service is going to charge you an extra 27 cents a minute to actually support their services. But the payment goes to GoGo Grandparent. It doesn't go to the Lyft or the Uber driver, but GoGo Parent will pay that driver that. So Susie, have you had good experiences with this? Do you know?
I do. Yeah, I was introduced to them when they started earlier, maybe I think 5-6 years ago. I would say if you're savvy enough and comfortable with Uber or another shared ride, that's more direct. I see this more as something that families who live a far way can help support like using technology to support their family or their loved ones.
Right.
So if I'm out of state, I can use the DoorDash to deliver a meal to my mom's house, or I could coordinate the ride for her, coordinate the ride to and from the doctor's appointment for her. So I think that's where the concierge kind of fee comes into play.
Okay. So we'll be sending this list of URLs out to folks who are on this call, but also we will put it up on the web.
I have one more suggestion, if I may.
Sure.
One of the other features I found on my smartphone that's working better and better. I am an iPhone user, but I know my husband has this on his Android. When you open the maps, like if I'm using my maps to go somewhere, It now allows me to either select vehicle, walking, or transportation. And so I can click the transportation, and I found for me, because I live out in the sticks, but if I want to go someplace in New York, I can use that where I'm starting, where I want to go, and it gives me enough to help narrow down my search, which is a great feature as well.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we've come to the end of our presentation, and I wanted to give people an opportunity to add some comments if they would like. Just raise your hand if you want to speak. Oh, Susie, go ahead.
I would say I love the conversation about trying different things. In my personal experience, I know that I have to push myself when I go to a new town or new city. It's something that I hesitate on, but once I start doing it, I always feel so much better. And then, after 3 days, I feel like a local whizzing around wherever I am. But I thought that was an interesting connection in my head that I made with that, and I can only imagine to prepare for, most of us are going to outlive our driving abilities by 7 to 10 years. So we should practice this now and kind of flex that muscle now and get used to the idea now, so it's easier if and when that comes.
Great. Well, I think that's a great comment to end this presentation on. And I want to thank Susie Tuchinski for her program, her presentation. It was very informative. We liked it very much. Nell and Margarita and Conrad, thank you so much for adding your perspective. I thought that was very, very helpful.
Yeah,
And,
I thought it was
again,
wonderful. Thank you.
Yep, this will be recorded and we'll put it up on the Concord Quarter YouTube page fairly soon. Okay, so I guess Chris, you can stop.